3 years after the war began, the Zephyrian Empire was collapsing from within. General Patricia Kelly stood on the bridge of the UES Determination, leading the largest human fleet ever assembled toward the heart of Zephyrian space. The aliens who had started this war as conquerors were now fighting desperately to defend their own worlds. Patricia had been a logistics officer when the war started, coordinating supply shipments between human colonies. The conflict had transformed her into one of humanity's most effective military commanders. She understood something that many generals forgot. Wars were won by people who could adapt faster than their enemies. General long-range sensors are detecting the Zephyrian home fleet, reported Commander Frank Wilson from his station. 15 capital ships and at least 40 escorts. They're forming defensive positions around their primary world. Patricia studied the tactical display with calm confidence. The human fleet under her command included ships from every human colony, each one modified with weapons and tactics learned through 3 years of brutal warfare. They were no longer the desperate defenders who had faced the first Zephyrian. Attack. Signal the fleet. Execute Plan Thunderstorm. The human ships split into multiple attack groups, each one approaching the Zephyrian defenses from a different angle. It was coordinated chaos on a massive scale, the kind of complex operation that required perfect timing and absolute trust between commanders. Captain Jake Harrison, now commanding the UES Dakota II after his original ship was destroyed in the Battle of New Geneva, led one of the assault groups. He remembered the fear he had felt during that first encounter with Admiral Vextar 3 years ago. Now he felt only determination. All ships, target the orbital defense platforms, Jake ordered. Clear the way for the second wave. The attack on the Zephyrian home system was unlike anything in galactic history. Human forces used every lesson they had learned about fighting aliens. EMP weapons disabled Zephyrian power systems. Kinetic bombardment overwhelmed their shields. Most importantly, human unpredictability made it impossible for alien commanders to mount an effective defense. Admiral Vextar watched the destruction of his fleet from his flagship, struggling to understand how this had happened. The humans were supposed to be a minor annoyance, easily crushed by superior Zephyrian technology. Instead, they had become the most dangerous enemy the Empire had ever faced. "Admiral, the humans are requesting communication," his aide announced. "Put them through." The image of General Patricia Kelly appeared on the screen. She looked tired but confident, like someone who had fought a long war and was finally seeing the end. "Admiral Vextar, I am General Kelly of the Human Colonial Alliance. Your fleet is defeated and your defenses have fallen. I am prepared to discuss terms for your surrender." Vextar felt something he had never experienced before: complete military defeat. "What are your terms, human?" "Immediate withdrawal of all Zephyrian forces from human space. Full reparations for destroyed colonies. Recognition of human sovereignty over all systems we currently occupy. In return, we will allow your surviving ships to return to your core worlds." The Admiral looked around his command center at the faces of his officers. They were the finest military minds in the Zephyrian Empire, trained in warfare techniques refined over thousands of years. Yet they had been defeated by a species that had barely discovered space travel. "I will need to consult with the High Command," Vextar said finally. The response from the Zephyrian capital came within hours. Emperor Kethfor himself appeared on the communication screen, his reptilian features showing emotions that Vextar had never seen before. Fear, anger, and something that might have been respect. "General Kelly," the Emperor began slowly, "the Zephyrian Empire accepts your terms. We will withdraw from human territory and provide the reparations you demand. But I must ask, how did your species accomplish this?" "Our military analysts predicted easy victory." Patricia considered her answer carefully. "Your Majesty, you studied our technology and thought you understood us. But you never understood what drives humans to fight. We don't fight for conquest or glory. We fight to protect the people we love and the places we call home. That makes us willing to do things that seem impossible. The formal surrender ceremony took place on neutral ground, a space station in the border region between human and Zephyrian space. Ambassador Susan Wright, who had replaced the murdered diplomat from the war's beginning, signed the peace treaty that ended the conflict. Captain Bobby Chun attended the ceremony as a representative of the human military. He watched as Zephyrian officials formally acknowledged human independence and sovereignty. 3 years ago, his people had been dismissed as primitive insects. Now they were respected as equals. Dr. Helen Carter, whose early observations about shield weaknesses had helped turn the tide of war, was also present. She looked at the Zephyrian delegation with scientific curiosity rather than hatred. The war was over, and it was time to think about building a peaceful future. What happens now? Asked Admiral Vexstar during a brief private meeting with General Kelly. Now your people go home and rebuild. Our people do the same. Maybe someday we can be neighbors instead of enemies. You realize that other species will learn of our defeat. The balance of power in this galaxy has changed forever. Patricia nodded. We know. Humanity is no longer the new species that others can push around. But we don't want to be conquerors. We just want to be left alone to build our own future. The Zephyrian fleet departed human space the following week, carrying the survivors of what had been the Empire's most powerful military force. Admiral Vexstar spent the journey home trying to write reports that would explain the inexplicable. Captain Jake Harrison returned to patrol duty in the Kepler 442 system, where the war had begun. The rebuilt colonies were thriving, and new settlements were being established on worlds that had once been considered too dangerous to colonize. Standing on the bridge of his new ship, Jake reflected on everything that had changed. Humanity had faced extinction and emerged stronger. They had been underestimated by a superior enemy and proven that technology alone didn't determine the outcome of wars. Dr. Amanda Price published her psychological studies of the war, which became required reading for military academies throughout human space. Her work explained why emotional resilience and adaptive thinking had proven more valuable than advanced weapons. The Zephyrians made a fundamental error, she wrote. They assumed that all species would respond to warfare the same way they did. They never considered that humans might become more determined when threatened, rather than less so. The war had cost humanity millions of lives and the destruction of several colonies. But it had also accomplished something unexpected. Humanity was now recognized as a major power in the galaxy, respected by species that had previously ignored them. News of the human victory spread throughout known space, carrying a simple message: underestimate humanity at your own risk. The species that had seemed primitive and weak had defeated one of the galaxy's oldest empires through courage, ingenuity, and an unbreakable will to survive. Years later, when other alien species encountered human explorers, they remembered the story of the Zephyrian War. They remembered that humans were not just another species to be conquered or dismissed. They were survivors who turned their greatest weaknesses into their greatest strengths. The galaxy had learned to respect humanity, and humanity had learned that they belonged among the stars. The great crystal dome of the Galactic Council Chamber sparkled with lights from 1,000 worlds. Representatives from 12 different species sat in their designated sections, each group separated by barriers of energy and tradition. The air hummed with tension as beings who had coexisted peacefully for centuries now faced their greatest crisis. Council leader Zephyrian stood at the center platform, his tall blue form casting shadows across the polished floor. His forearms gestured slowly as he activated the massive holographic display above them. The ancient Altarian had served the council for over 200 years. Yet today, his usual calm demeanor showed cracks of worry in the farthest corner of the chamber. Commander Jake Morrison sat alone in the human observation section. The metal chair felt cold against his back as he watched the alien delegates whisper among themselves. Their conversations stopped whenever they glanced his way, replaced by looks he had grown accustomed to over the past 5 years. Fear mixed with disgust painted their alien features, as if his mere presence contaminated their sacred halls. Dr. Lisa Carter shifted nervously beside him, her fingers tapping against her data pad. As the leading human expert on xenobiology, she understood the alien mindset better than most humans. That knowledge made this moment even more terrifying for her. She had seen the classified files, read the reports that had been sealed for 3 centuries. Today, those secrets would finally see the light of distant suns. The vegan representative, a creature resembling a massive praying mantis, clicked its mandibles in agitation. The insectoid being had been among the first to call for this emergency session. Beside it, the jellyfish-like Aquarian delegate pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that translated roughly to extreme distress in their complex light language. Zephyrian raised his primary hand, and silence fell across the chamber like a heavy blanket. His voice carried the weight of authority when he spoke, each word carefully chosen and delivered with the precision that had made him legendary among diplomats. Honored representatives, we gather today to address a matter that has remained classified for 300 standard years. Recent events in the Outer Rim have forced us to reconsider decisions made by our predecessors, decisions that may have been based on incomplete understanding of a species we thought we knew. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the blue and green marble of Earth spinning slowly in the cosmic void. Jake felt a pang of homesickness as he watched his homeworld rotate peacefully, unaware of the debate taking place light years away. The human species was granted observer status in our council 50 years ago, after serving a lengthy probationary period following their ban from galactic warfare. That ban, enacted in the year 2387 by Emergency Resolution 1847, was presented to the galaxy as a measure to prevent the spread of human aggression and primitive warfare tactics. The Krillian delegate, a rock-like being whose species had once been enslaved by the Zephyrian Empire, rumbled its disagreement. The sound echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. Jake knew that the Krillians remembered human intervention during their rebellion. Even if the official records had been altered, Dr. Carter leaned closer to Jake and whispered, "They are going to show the footage." Her voice carried a mix of pride and terror that made Jake's stomach clench. He had seen glimpses of what was coming, fragments of reports that painted his species in a light that no human had ever expected. Zephyrian continued his address, his secondary arms now manipulating controls that brought up classified symbols across the display. However, recent analysis of archived battle footage from the Terran-Vegan War has revealed information that fundamentally changes our understanding of why humans were truly banned from warfare. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, clicks, whistles, and harmonic resonances that served as speech for the various species. The Draconian representative, a scaled humanoid whose people had fought alongside humans in several conflicts, remained notably silent. Jake caught the creature's golden eyes and saw something unexpected there: respect. The holographic display shifted to show a battlefield scene from 3 centuries ago. Smoke and energy blasts filled the air as human soldiers moved across alien terrain. The footage quality was poor, recorded by emergency beacon cameras during the chaos of combat, but the images were clear enough to show what happened next. A human soldier, his armor cracked and leaking atmosphere, carried another wounded human across open ground, while enemy fire rained down around them. The wounded soldier appeared to be unconscious, possibly dead, yet his comrade refused to leave him behind. Energy bolts scorched the ground inches from their feet, as the healthy soldier stumbled and fell, then rose again and continued his desperate rescue attempt. "Captain Ryan Brooks of the 3rd Terran Marines," Zephyrian announced, his voice carrying a strange note of something that might have been admiration. "Battle of Vega Station, Day 14 of the siege. Enemy forces had cut off retreat routes. For his unit, standard galactic warfare protocols dictate immediate surrender when casualties exceed acceptable losses and evacuation becomes impossible." The footage continued, showing more human soldiers joining Brooks, despite the obvious futility of the situation. They formed a protective circle around their wounded, returning fire while medics worked frantically to save lives that any rational species would have written off as acceptable losses. Lieutenant Amy Foster had been struck by a vegan plasma weapon. Her vital signs showed massive organ failure. By all medical standards of known species, she was already dead. Yet observe what the humans did next. The camera angle shifted to show human medics working over Foster's body with an intensity that bordered on the fanatical. They refused to stop their efforts, even as enemy forces closed in around their position. Other soldiers took wounds defending. The medical team, creating an ever-widening circle of sacrifice that defied every principle of logical warfare. The Aquarian delegate pulsed with patterns of confusion. In their species, the wounded were left to die so that the healthy could survive and continue their genetic line. The concept of risking multiple lives to save one individual violated every instinct they possessed. The humans held that position. For 6 more hours, Zephyrian continued. They sustained 73% casualties, defending their wounded. When extraction finally became possible, they carried out every single member of their unit. The living carried the wounded. The wounded carried the dead. Not one human body was left behind. Jake felt tears forming in his eyes as he watched his species' ancestors demonstrate the values that had been bred into human DNA through millions of years of evolution. They had learned to survive not as individuals, but as a group that refused to abandon its members. Dr. Carter gripped her datapad so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She understood the implications of what the Council was seeing. Humans did not fight like any other species in the galaxy. They fought with an emotional intensity that made them unpredictable, unreliable, and ultimately ungovernable. The footage ended with Captain Brooks carrying Lieutenant Foster into the extraction ship. Foster had survived, though she would carry the scars of that battle for the rest of her life. Brooks had died 3 days later from wounds sustained during the rescue, but he had lived long enough to see his soldiers safe. Zephyrian turned to face the human section directly, his alien features unreadable, but his posture suggesting deep contemplation. This footage was classified not because it showed human brutality, but because it showed something far more dangerous to galactic stability. It showed that humans fight for reasons that no other species can understand or predict. The chamber fell silent as the implications began to sink in. For 3 centuries, the galaxy had believed humans were banned for being too violent. Now they were learning the truth. Humans had been banned for caring too much. The holographic display shimmered and changed, transporting the council chamber back through time to the year 2284. The crystalline walls reflected images of a younger galaxy, one that had known peace for over 1,000 years. In those days, conflicts between species were rare and ritualized, settled through single combat between chosen warriors, rather than the brutal warfare that had once scarred entire star systems. Ambassador Paul Stevens stood on the deck of the human vessel Enterprise as it approached Nexus Prime for the first time. His gray hair was perfectly combed despite months of space travel, and his blue suit represented the best that Earth's diplomats could offer. Behind him, a small team of human scientists and military advisors watched through the viewports as alien ships surrounded their vessel, in what they hoped was a gesture of welcome rather than threat. The galaxy that greeted humanity was unlike anything they had imagined. 12 species had formed a loose confederation based on mutual benefit and shared resources. War was almost unknown, remembered only in ancient texts and archaeological sites. When conflicts did arise, they were settled through elaborate ceremonies, where each side selected a champion to fight until one yielded or died. The victor's species would claim the disputed territory or resources, and life would continue peacefully. General Linda Parker reviewed the tactical briefings in her quarters aboard the military escort ship. Her weathered face showed the scars of Earth's last global conflict, fought decades before first contact. She understood warfare in ways that the peaceful galaxy could not comprehend. But she also hoped that humanity could learn to embrace the galactic way of resolving disputes. The human military had agreed to observe and learn from their new alien allies. The Zephyrian Empire had seemed like natural partners for humanity. Their blue-skinned leaders spoke of order, civilization, and the benefits of joining a galactic community. Ambassador Stevens signed treaties and agreements that promised mutual defense and shared technology. Earth's population celebrated as they officially became part of something greater than their single world. But peace in the galaxy was fragile, built on assumptions that all species shared similar values and limitations. The first test came when the Zephyrian Empire decided to expand into the outer colonies, claiming that several worlds contained resources vital to galactic stability. The other species accepted this explanation without question, trusting in the established order that had kept them safe for centuries. The Kepler Station incident changed everything. The research station orbited a gas giant on the edge of Zephyrian space, home to 3,000 civilians from 6 different species. When Zephyrian forces arrived to claim the system, they gave the station 24 hours to evacuate. Standard Galactic Protocol called for immediate compliance to avoid unnecessary casualties. Colonel Chris Johnson commanded the small human security force assigned to protect the station. His orders were clear: observe Zephyrian operations and ensure human citizens were safely evacuated. But when the alien civilians begged for help, explaining that they had nowhere else to go and no ships capable of reaching safe harbor, Johnson faced a choice that no human commander had ever encountered. The Zephyrian fleet consisted of 12 heavy cruisers against Johnson's single frigate and 40 human marines. By every measure of galactic warfare, resistance was impossible. The logical response was immediate surrender, followed by an orderly evacuation that would save the maximum number of lives. Johnson's alien advisors urged him to follow established protocols. Instead, Johnson sent a message to the Zephyrian commander: Kepler Station is under human protection. You will withdraw or face the consequences. The other species representatives on the station stared at him in shock. No one had ever refused a Zephyrian ultimatum before. The battle lasted 18 hours. Johnson's Marines fought with a ferocity that stunned both their allies and enemies. They used every piece of equipment on the station as weapons, turning research labs into bomb factories and observation decks into sniper nests. When their ammunition ran low, they improvised explosives from mining equipment. When their positions were overrun, they fought hand-to-hand with tools and broken metal. Sergeant Danny White volunteered for the final mission when it became clear that conventional weapons could not stop the Zephyrian advance. The station's reactor could be overloaded manually, creating an explosion powerful enough to destroy the enemy fleet, but someone would have to stay behind to trigger the detonation. White walked into the reactor chamber, knowing he would never walk out. His final transmission reached the human fleet 3 days later. Tell my wife I kept my promise. Tell my kids their daddy protected the good people. Danny White, 3rd Marines, signing off. The explosion that followed vaporized the station and took 6 Zephyrian cruisers with it. forcing the remainder to retreat. The galactic community was horrified. No species had ever chosen mutual destruction over surrender. The concept of sacrificing oneself to protect non-relatives violated every evolutionary instinct that had allowed intelligent life to develop. Zephyrian analysts spent months trying to understand why humans would choose death over the logical option of negotiated retreat. General Parker arrived at Kepler Station 3 weeks later to find debris fields and escape pods carrying survivors from 6 different species. The aliens spoke of human soldiers who had died protecting them, humans who had given their lives for beings they had never met and would never see again. The refugees used words like crazy and impossible to describe what they had witnessed. Draconian survivor named Korith still remembered Sergeant Maria Lopez, who had shielded him from plasma fire with her own body. Lopez had died saving someone whose species she could barely pronounce, whose culture she did not understand, whose existence meant nothing to her genetic survival. Yet she had made that choice without hesitation. Parker reviewed the battle reports and security footage with growing amazement and horror. Her soldiers had fought beyond every reasonable limit, sustaining casualties that should have broken their morale and shattered their unit cohesion. Instead, they had grown more determined as their losses mounted. The closer they came to total destruction, the harder they fought. The galactic military observers filed reports that would remain classified for centuries. They wrote of humans who seemed to gain strength from desperate situations, who fought hardest when victory was impossible. They documented behavior that violated every known principle of warfare and survival. They witnessed something that no other species could comprehend. Humans who would rather die than abandon their principles. Word spread through the galaxy of the humans who had destroyed themselves rather than surrender. Some species spoke of it with admiration, others with fear, but all understood that something fundamental had changed in their peaceful community. A species had joined them that played by different rules that could not be predicted or controlled. Through traditional methods, the Zephyrian Empire demanded an explanation for human behavior at Kepler Station. Ambassador Stevens struggled to find words that could bridge the gap between human and alien understanding. How could he explain that humans fought for abstract concepts like duty and honor? How could he make them understand that some things were worth dying for, even when death served no practical purpose? The seeds of the ban were planted in those confused diplomatic meetings. The galaxy had welcomed humans as another rational species that would fit neatly into their established order. Instead, they had discovered beings whose actions could not be calculated or anticipated, whose responses defied logic and self-preservation. Colonel Johnson received a posthumous medal from Earth and a formal censure from the Galactic Council. His actions had saved 3,000 civilians and prevented Zephyrian expansion into contested space. They had also demonstrated that humans could not be trusted to follow the rules that kept galactic civilization stable and predictable. Dr. Viridian moved to the center of the council chamber with the fluid grace that made her species renowned throughout the galaxy as natural scientists. Her silver skin reflected the holographic displays as she prepared to present research that had taken her 30 years to complete. The tall, elegant being had studied the psychology of warfare across dozens of species, but nothing had prepared her for what she discovered about humans. The assembled representatives watched nervously as she activated her personal data core. Charts and graphs appeared in the air around her, showing brain scans, stress responses, and behavioral patterns that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligent life. Her research had been classified at the highest levels because its implications threatened the very foundation of galactic civilization. Commander Jake Morrison felt his heart racing as he recognized some of the footage about to be displayed. He had read the classified reports during his years of service, but seeing the data presented to hostile alien minds made him realize how truly different humans were from the rest of the galaxy. Dr. Lisa Carter gripped her chair as she watched. Her own species being dissected, like laboratory specimens. Dr. Viridian's voice carried the authority of someone who had dedicated her life to understanding the incomprehensible. Her words were measured and precise, each one chosen to convey the magnitude of her discoveries to minds that might not be able to accept what they were hearing. Honored representatives, my research began as an attempt to understand why human military units perform better under extreme stress rather than worse. Every known species in our galaxy shows decreased cognitive function, reduced physical performance, and impaired decision-making when facing extinction-level threats. Humans exhibit the opposite response. The first hologram showed brain scans from various species during combat situations. The alien minds displayed predictable patterns of stress, fear, and self-preservation instincts that led to logical retreat when survival became uncertain. Then the human scans appeared, showing neural activity that spiked dramatically when faced with impossible odds. I call this phenomenon crisis amplification. When humans believe they are about to die, their brains release chemicals that increase strength, speed, and pain tolerance, while simultaneously enhancing emotional connections to their fellow soldiers. They become more effective fighters precisely when logic dictates they should surrender. The footage shifted to show human medic Kate Thompson working on Terra Nova during the Great Siege. Enemy artillery fell around her like deadly rain as she moved between wounded soldiers from 3 different species. Her movements were calm and precise despite the chaos, her hands steady as she treated injuries that would have sent other species fleeing in panic. Thompson had been questioned extensively after the battle. When asked why she risked her life for wounded aliens, she had simply stated that they needed help. The concept was so basic to her that she could not understand why the question was being asked. To Thompson, the species of the wounded was irrelevant. They were hurt. She could help them. Therefore, she would help them regardless of personal risk. The galactic mind could not process such thinking. Evolution demanded that individuals prioritize their own survival and that of their genetic relatives. Risking death for unrelated members of other species violated every natural law that had shaped intelligent life. Yet humans did it routinely. Almost instinctively. Dr. Viridian displayed security footage from prisoner-of-war camps across the galaxy. The recordings showed something that had puzzled alien commanders for decades. While most species accepted capture as a form of defeat and waited peacefully for prisoner exchanges, humans never stopped trying to escape. Lieutenant Steve Adams had been captured during the Rigel campaign, along with soldiers from 4 different species. The alien prisoners settled into camp routine, accepting their situation with the resignation that came naturally to beings who understood when they were beaten. Adams immediately began planning an escape that would have been impossible for any individual to achieve. The footage showed Adams organizing elaborate tunneling operations, creating weapons from camp supplies, and establishing communication networks with other prisoners. His escape attempts always included plans to free every prisoner in the camp, regardless of species. When guards discovered one tunnel, Adams would begin digging another while simultaneously helping alien prisoners contact their families and maintaining morale among the captured. Lieutenant Adams made 17 escape attempts during his 2 years of captivity, Dr. Viridian continued. 14 of those attempts were designed primarily to help other prisoners escape, even though Adams himself could have fled the camp on at least 6 occasions. When questioned about this behavior, he stated that he could not leave his fellow prisoners behind. The most disturbing footage came from Camp Designation Theta 7, where humans had been imprisoned alongside Krillian political prisoners. The rocky-skinned aliens had been captured during their failed rebellion and were scheduled for execution as an example to other potential rebels. Standard galactic law allowed the execution of military prisoners taken during civil conflicts. Human prisoners, led by Sergeant Bill Murphy, had staged a breakout specifically to save the Krillians. Murphy knew that his own species would eventually be released through diplomatic channels, but the Krillians faced certain death. The escape attempt had been suicidal, with only a minimal chance of success. Yet every human in the camp had volunteered to participate. The security recordings showed Murphy and his men fighting through automated defenses with improvised weapons. 3 humans died breaking through the outer perimeter. 2 more sacrificed themselves to disable the camp's communication array. Murphy himself had been mortally wounded while carrying an injured Krillian prisoner to the evacuation point. His final words, recorded by camp security systems, were spoken to the Krillian he was carrying. "Tell your people that humans keep their promises. Tell them we did not forget." Murphy died 20 minutes later, but his actions had saved 47 Krillian prisoners who would have been executed the following week. Dr. Viridian paused to let the implications sink in. The chamber was silent, except for the quiet hum of life support systems and the occasional whisper of alien breathing. The representatives were struggling to understand how a species could survive evolution while consistently making choices that endangered their own existence for the benefit of others. My analysis indicates that human empathy extends beyond their own species in ways we cannot predict or control. They form emotional bonds with any being they perceive as needing protection, regardless of genetic relationship, cultural similarity, or potential benefit to themselves. This makes them the most dangerous allies in the galaxy. The Aquarian delegate pulsed with patterns of deep confusion. In their ocean world, individuals who risked themselves for non-relatives were quickly eliminated by natural selection. The survival of the group depended on each member making logical decisions based on genetic benefit. Human behavior represented a form of insanity that should have destroyed their species before they developed space travel. Yet humans had not only survived, but thrived. They had built a civilization that valued individual sacrifice for collective benefit, creating a society where the weak were protected by the strong and the injured were never abandoned. Their military forces reflected these values, producing soldiers who fought harder for their comrades than for themselves. Dr. Viridian activated her final display, showing psychological profiles of human military personnel. The graphs revealed something that had taken her years to understand. Human soldiers were not motivated primarily by patriotism, revenge, or conquest like other species. They fought to protect something they called the innocent, a category that included anyone they perceived as unable to defend themselves. This protection instinct extended to alien civilians, captured enemies, and even hostile forces that surrendered. Humans had been observed risking their lives to provide medical aid to enemy soldiers, sharing their food with captured opponents, and treating prisoners of war with kindness that bordered on friendship. Such behavior was not only unprecedented, but actively dangerous to galactic stability. The chamber remained quiet as the full scope of Dr. Viridian's research became clear. Humans were not banned from warfare because they were too violent or primitive. They were banned because their compassion made them unpredictable, uncontrollable, and ultimately ungovernable. They could not be trusted to follow orders that conflicted with their moral code, and their moral code seemed to include protecting everyone except themselves. The holographic display changed once more, showing classified files that had been sealed in the deepest archives of the Galactic Council. Council leader Zephyrian's expression grew somber as he prepared to reveal the incident that had finally forced the galaxy to ban humans from all military operations. The truth had been buried for 3 centuries, hidden beneath layers of diplomatic language and official explanations that protected the reputation of several council species. Admiral Patricia Hayes stood on the bridge of her flagship watching. the Krillian homeworld grow larger on the main screen. Her orders were clear and came directly from the Galactic Council. Suppress the rebellion on Krillia. Prime and restore order to the mining operations that supplied raw materials to half the galaxy. The rocky world below held billions of Krillian workers who had stopped production and declared independence from their Zephyrian overseers. Not the human fleet consisted of 12 ships carrying 30,000 Marines and support personnel. They had been chosen for this mission because human forces had proven effective at putting down civil unrest without the massive casualties that other species typically inflicted. The Council expected a quick resolution that would send a message to other potential rebels throughout the galaxy. Captain Tom Bradley reviewed the intelligence reports in his ready room aboard the cruiser Defiance. The official briefings described the Krillians as ungrateful workers who had been corrupted by radical ideas about self-governance. According to Zephyrian authorities, the rebels were terrorists who threatened the stability of interstellar commerce and needed to be eliminated before their rebellion spread to other worlds. But Bradley had served alongside Krillian soldiers during the vegan conflicts, and he knew them to be honorable beings who valued hard work and family above all else. The idea that they would suddenly become violent revolutionaries without serious provocation seemed unlikely. He requested permission to investigate the situation personally before beginning military operations. Admiral Hayes granted Bradley's request, partly because she shared his doubts about the official story. Human intelligence gathering was superior to most species because humans had learned to read emotional cues and body language that other beings missed. If there was more to this rebellion than the Council understood, her people would discover the truth. Bradley's landing party consisted of 50 Marines and diplomatic personnel who were ordered to make contact with both rebel leaders and Zephyrian administrators. What they found on Krillia Prime shocked even veterans who had seen the worst of galactic warfare. The mining camps were little more than slave labor facilities where Krillian families worked 18-hour shifts in conditions that would have killed most other species. The Krillian children were particularly disturbing to the human observers. Young beings who should have been learning and playing were instead working in dangerous mining tunnels, their small bodies allowing them to access ore deposits that adult workers could not reach. Many showed signs of malnutrition and injuries from industrial accidents that received minimal medical treatment. Sergeant Ellen Price interviewed Krillian families in their cramped living quarters and discovered that the rebellion had started when Zephyrian overseers began separating children from their parents to work in the deepest mines. The rocky beings had endured decades of harsh working conditions without complaint, but the threat to their young had triggered a protective response that overrode their natural submission to authority. The human investigators found mass graves containing thousands of Krillian workers who had died from exhaustion, accidents, and preventable diseases. The Zephyrian administrators kept meticulous records of production quotas, but showed no interest in worker mortality rates. To them, the Krillians were expendable resources that could be replaced when they wore out. Captain Bradley transmitted his findings to Admiral Hayes with a recommendation that human forces withdraw immediately and file a formal complaint with the Galactic Council about conditions on Krillia Prime. The rebellion was not terrorism, but a desperate attempt by an enslaved population to protect their families from systematic genocide. Admiral Hayes faced an impossible choice when she received Bradley's report. Her orders came directly from the Council and could not be ignored without facing court-martial and imprisonment. But the evidence of Zephyrian atrocities was overwhelming, and her conscience would not allow her to participate in the suppression of beings who were fighting for their basic right to survive. The human fleet's response became known throughout the galaxy as the Krillia Incident, though the official records were carefully edited to hide the true scope of what happened. Admiral Hayes broadcast a message to the Galactic Council. announcing that human forces would not participate in military action against the Krillian rebels. Instead, they would remain in orbit to provide humanitarian aid and protection for civilian populations. The Council's reaction was immediate and furious. No species had ever refused a direct military order, and the precedent threatened the entire structure of galactic governance. If humans could ignore commands they disagreed with, then the careful balance of power that maintained peace between species would collapse into chaos. Captain Bradley and his landing party made the situation worse by openly joining the rebellion. They began training Krillian fighters in human military tactics and providing weapons and medical supplies to rebel forces. When Zephyrian reinforcements arrived to restore order, they found human soldiers fighting alongside the beings they had been ordered to suppress. The phrase, "going human," entered galactic vocabulary during the Krillia Rebellion. It meant abandoning rational self-interest to help the underdog in a hopeless fight. Other species used the term as an insult, implying behavior that was both stupid and dangerous. But for humans, going human meant following their conscience, regardless of consequences. Commander Rick Santos commanded the human destroyer Phoenix when it detected a distress signal from detention facility Omega-12 in the Zephyrian system. His orders were to ignore all non-human communications and proceed directly to the Krillia system to support the main fleet. But the signal indicated that thousands of beings were dying in what appeared to be a concentration camp. Santos faced the same choice that had confronted every human commander since first contact with the galaxy. He could follow orders and ignore the suffering of innocent beings, or he could risk his career and possibly his life to investigate. For Santos, there was no real choice at all. The Phoenix broke formation and jumped to the coordinates of the distress signal. What Santos found there would haunt him for the rest of his life. Detention Facility Omega-12 was a massive space station, holding over 100,000 political prisoners from 6 different species. The beings were kept in overcrowded cells without adequate food, water, or medical care. The facility's commander, a Zephyrian colonel named Thyrex, explained that the prisoners were enemies of galactic stability, who had been detained for their own protection and the security of civilized worlds. Most were family members of rebels, intellectuals who had questioned government policies, or ordinary citizens who had been in the wrong place when security sweeps were conducted. Santos demanded immediate access to the detention areas and found conditions that violated every treaty and convention that governed the treatment of prisoners in galactic space. Beings were dying from disease, starvation, and medical neglect at rates that constituted systematic extermination. Children were separated from their parents and held in facilities that lacked basic life support. The human commander faced another impossible choice. He could report the situation through proper channels and wait for the Council to investigate, knowing that thousands more beings would die during the bureaucratic process. Or he could take direct action to save lives, knowing that such action would be considered an act of war against a Council member species. Santos chose to save lives. The Phoenix called for support from other human vessels, and within hours, small fleet had assembled around detention facility Omega-12. The humans demanded immediate release of all prisoners and threatened to destroy the station if their demands were not met. The liberation of Omega-12 took 3 days and resulted in the rescue of over 100,000 beings from 6 different species. Santos personally led the boarding parties that secured the detention areas and organized the evacuation of prisoners who were too weak to walk. His crew worked around the clock to provide medical care and emergency supplies to beings who had been forgotten by the galaxy. The political consequences were catastrophic for human-galactic relations. Santos had attacked a facility belonging to a Council member species without authorization from any government. His actions were technically piracy and could have justified a full-scale military response against Earth itself. The rescued prisoners told stories of human soldiers who had risked everything to save them, but their gratitude meant nothing to the species that governed galactic civilization.